James Benjamin Black III, but most people call me Bud. I was at the University of South Carolina, and in those days we didn't have air conditioning or heating, so the window was open. And I heard a radio outside the window in an automobile say that the Japanese had attacked it. I immediately wanted to know more about it, so we went to town and got the first newspapers that they put out that told about it, because they had extra. In those days they put extras out, and they had an extra out pretty quick, telling what had happened, but you know, nobody knew any real situation about it. I just knew there was a problem ahead. It's because we'd already been aware of World War II, which was going on in Europe. And our thoughts, I think, were more toward Europe than they were toward the Pacific. We had no idea this was happening in the Pacific. Well, I was a freshman at that time, and I had already enrolled in a naval ROTC, which was at University of South Carolina. And so I continued to be in the naval ROTC. And at first they told us there wasn't any use to sign up for the draft because we were in a unit. But eventually they told us December of '42 that we needed to get signed up with them as a seaman and also tell the draft. So that's the way that worked out. But there was no rush really to do either one. But my naval time started in December of '42, and I was still a student. But then they started our going to school year-round, 12 months instead of 9 months. And I was at the university taking regular courses, including naval courses, until February of '44. In February of '44, they commissioned the senior class. I was in the junior class. They commissioned the senior class on a Saturday, and they commissioned the junior class the next day on Sunday, so that the seniors would have 1 day seniority. At first we knew that things were happening in Europe, and we just had the impression that we would be going in that direction. And we had orders, or we were told we had orders that involved that. But then when we showed up on Sunday morning to get our orders, about 9 of us had our orders changed, and they sent us to Harvard for a communications course. So we went through that program, and then at that time, the main invasion of Europe had already started, and so they decided, well, these people will go to the Pacific. So they gave us, then our group went to Solomons, Maryland for amphibious training. And we were there a couple of months, and then headed on to the Pacific for actual duty on a ship. I was on an LCI. I reported to San Diego, and the LCI was a small ship, 127 feet long, flat bottom, bounced like a wash tub, and I stayed sick most of the time. But when we got across the Pacific, we came into New Guinea, and as soon as we got there, the commander of our flotilla, we had a flotilla, I was on the flotilla staff of LCIs. The commander called us in and said that we don't have any immediate duties, and there's a staff down at the south part, on a ship in the south part of New Guinea that needs assistance because the staff for that operation has not arrived in the United States. So they took our entire staff, which is about 6 people, I think, and we headed for the southern part of New Guinea and got on a ship there, the Olmsted, and we handled their communications there for a Captain Abbott for about a month, and then his staff arrived from the United States, communication staff. So then they put us on a transport, which was the Robin Doncaster, and shipped us back up to Hollandia where we had previously been. It took us about a week to get back up there. And when we arrived that time, the captain called me in and he says, "Didn't you have a lot of trouble with seasickness coming on?" I said, "I sure did." He said, "You need to be on a bigger ship." I thought, "That sounds good to me." He said, well, I'm going to get you on something else, but I don't know what it'll be. But right now, we've got another staff problem, and I need you in the Philippines. And the staff, at the moment I can't remember the admiral's name. Struble, I believe it was. The ship had been hit. He was on the Nashville, and it had been hit a cruiser. And so they had transferred his group to the Philippines, and then they were just pulling us in where they could get some, because a good many of his people had been killed. And they pulled us in from wherever, again, temporarily, because they were setting up a staff in the United States to send out to him. You know, they were very selective. But anyway, we went there to fill the gap. And as soon as I got aboard the ship, he turned us over to Captain Murphy, who was going ashore at Tacloban in the Philippines. I was on the Lady Gulf, working up plans for another invasion. We had a sort of a Quonset hut, which was mostly underground, but a little bit of it was above ground. He was a senior man, I was a junior man. I was an anchor man. And my primary job while with him for about 30 days was I handled the guard mail, and I took the messages and whatever the plans were to headquarters each morning by jeep. I put on a .45 pistol, and I had a driver, and we rode up every day to take all of it, whatever had been developed in the last 24 hours. We took it up to the headquarters at, I think it was Tacloban. I got a different driver almost every day, but I got where I was almost a tour guide to tell him how to get there, but it was all dirt paths mostly that we went through. And you know, you had no idea where the Japanese were. They were still available, but we never had any problems. It was a good ride, and that was most of my experience on that particular location. Because at the end of that 30 days, he had his plans all put together, and he was ready to go into action. And he had his new staff in. So then I had to wait for whatever the next job coming along was. And they said they had an LST that needed a person. Well, I had been trained for communications, so they said, well, they need a communicator, and I said, well, good. And so I went to the ship, and as soon as I got there, I could tell that it was modern communications, which didn't really bother me. What it was is that ship's crew had been on it for 18 months to 2 years, and they were ready to transfer all of that crew out and get a new crew on. So I was the first one of the new crew that arrived, and I was communications for a few months until a new captain arrived, and he asked me what was my real preference. I said, well, I really liked navigation when I was in school. He said, you're the navigator. So that's what I did for the most time, and I enjoyed it. I had learned a little bit of actual use of it when I was on that LCI crossing, but I enjoyed it. But we didn't have any kind of electronic equipment, you know, like ships do today. No radar, no sonar, no any of those electronics. We did everything by hand, sextant, and figured out where you were every day. And occasionally we were the officer in tactical command, and we still did everything by hand, where some of the other ships actually had the radar and other equipment. But our ship never was lucky at having any of that type of equipment, but it was a good experience. But it was the ship, as I told you, I think a little previous to this, really was designed or turned into, remodeled into being a hospital ship. I'll call it first aid ship, whatever you might want to call it. It was the only ship of its type in the Pacific. Admiral Bobby had seen the need for it. And when this ship pulled into Australia, which was prior to my time, he designated that would be his hospital ship. He said he needed some medical assistance on the scene. He got some architects to draw up what they needed to do to change it into that. And really most of this stuff was done with wood, you know, not steel, and it could splinter. but they designed the tank deck where instead of carrying tanks, it had beds and could handle, initially it handled about 70 patients, but ultimately it handled 175 patients. And they had operating rooms. Initially, I think they had about 30 corpsmen and maybe 10 doctors, but ultimately they came up to about 60 corpsmen and 15 doctors of all types, specialists. And they went into combat zone, and in a period prior to my arriving, they were in a good bit of combat, and they got shot at quite a bit by Japanese. And it was amazing to me that the Japanese always knew where we were. On the radio every night, there'd be a message out there that we've spotted the 464 today, and this is such and such place. It just amazed us. Every night how you could get the word from where. But a lot of places where we were, there were mountains, and so the Japanese could have been in the hills spotting it. But it was a little bit action on your nerves when every day you'd hear a report from them. They knew where you were. And what they kept saying is you are acting in opposition to the Geneva Conference or Convention, which we really weren't, because the Geneva Convention allowed for hospital ships to be painted white and stay 20 miles outside of the combat zone, and hospital ship would not be shot at. Well, we weren't painted white. We had camouflage just like any other ship. We had guns just like any other ship. And we could go in close where the action was and pick up the people that need to be picked up, and then later at the appropriate time could take them out to the hospital ships. So we really didn't violate any convention. But she tried to keep telling us that, just sort of wore on nerves. But they never caught up with us. And we were first in Lady Gulf for quite some time, and then we went around to Subic Bay, and we were in that area for a good while. And when we were at Subic Bay, that was the northern part of the Philippines, and we were the primary ship that would evacuate injured people back to Manila Bay, and at Manila we'd either find a hospital ship to put them on, or we'd get them transported over to where the aircraft were, and they'd get flown out. At the end of the war, we were being completely reconstructed and brought up to date because they thought that we would be used in the invasion of Japan. But then came the nuclear, and we didn't have to go through that event. But they were getting ready for another big invasion. I mean, they were prepared for it. Everything was ready, and they already had all the ships designated, what you would do and all that kind of stuff. And we were being brought completely up to date for that event. After Japan surrendered, we were sent to Korea and went in on an invasion just like a regular invasion, because they had no idea, Japan was in Korea. They had no idea how they would be accepted there. The Japanese had gotten the word, and they didn't cause any real problems. The U.S. was able to go ahead and land and take over. But what MacArthur did, which ended up being pretty smart, is he immediately made the Japanese commanders who were there in charge of the military police. And they had control of the Koreans, and they responded to us, and there was never any problem with the way things worked out. Then they decided they would have the same type operation in China. So we went to Tacubaya, China, and they had the same type, Marines had the same type invasion there and went ashore. And there was no real problems, but what was more difficult because the Japanese in China really didn't want to give up the way they did in Korea. And it was not safe to go anywhere in China without several people going together. You didn't go anywhere alone. You could go alone in Korea. We didn't usually do it, but it was not safe at all in China. And then we went down to Tsingtao, China, on a similar type operation. And again, these were just exercises because there were no casualties. But you know, they had to go through this type exercise in order for safety. So once that was over, they decided, well, the war is really over and we'll send you back home. So we headed back to the United States and brought the LST. We went to San Francisco, and we spent about 2 months in San Francisco offloading this medical unit that was aboard us and getting all of the people transferred, but also getting all of their equipment taken off the ship. Then we went to Galveston, went through the Panama Canal and went to Galveston. And at Galveston, we gradually decommissioned the ship. And following that, we were there almost 2 months, getting the ship ready for decommission. And then it was decommissioned, and they sent us back home. Any kind of equipment you've got on that, anything that's loose, you know, you got to get it off. We had a Jeep, and that Jeep had to go to somebody. And the landing forces had all types of rifles and things like that. All that stuff had to be put off. But, and then they were really getting the ship ready to see, you know, what this yard was taking it over to decommission. What can they sell to somebody? And so once they got it, they you know, tore it all down and cut the steel up, and that was the end of it, unfortunately. And we got rid of those most too quick, and not about 1 or 2 of them left around. It seemed to be the right decision. It got the response that was needed to end the war. I mean, that made the occupation of Japan very easy. Nothing significant. Once when I was in Manila, again, I mean, we were off, really we were on Liberty, several of us together, and we walked into this area, and a man from a distance started firing. And as soon as he started firing, a shore patrol came flying up in a Jeep and said, "Hop in here, I shouldn't have let y'all come in here." And he got us out of it, but it wasn't any real significance. I was real glad I was on the type ship I was on, because I felt like it was a mercy mission rather than a killing mission. And I don't know how well I'd have done if I was on a combatant ship, but I just felt like I was in the right place. And we did a good job. And it was a good crew. Everybody worked together marvelously. And we've had several reunions since then, and everybody's still, but the bulk of them really are dead now. Not many still living. Well, since I'd been a junior, I went back to the University of South Carolina to finish my schooling. And after I'd been there 1 semester, my girlfriend and I got married. I had met her during service before I went overseas. And we got married at the end of the first semester, and so we lived together during that semester and finished the second semester, Carolyn Hagler. And the job she had in Charleston, she was with a bank. They transferred her to Columbia to a bank. And I was on GI Bill of Rights for, what, $85 a month, I think, and we thought we were in heaven, because even though we lived in a junky place, we had a home. And then after that, I graduated the next semester, and then we came to Georgetown. And I'd been hunting jobs, and I found a job at the International Paper Company, and my wife found a job there also, and so that began our career with International. But we didn't always stay in Georgetown. We've lived here 4 different times. we were getting transferred around a good bit. And then I went back into the Korean affair. I got called back into that. I was a member of this local unit in Georgetown. I got called back in and went to Norfolk, to Little Creek, and at that time I was promoted to lieutenant, and I joined the AOTE, which is Amphibious Operational Training Element, and we had the responsibility of training all of the amphibious ships on the Atlantic coast into doing whatever combatant duties were necessary. So I had, we had a full force of just about the same complement as a ship would have, and I had about the same number of enlisted men working with me, and we'd go aboard these ships that came into Little Creek, and they'd come for about 2 weeks training, and we'd go through beach operations and they'd do schooling, and we'd go aboard the ship and do schooling, and we would go out to sea with them and do schooling. Most of our operations were done on some close by beach, going in, making landings. And so that was a rather easy year as far as I had 2 years as far as I was concerned, because I could get home almost every night. And but we felt like we were accomplishing something because we were training a lot of people, and they were getting whatever experiences we'd had from World War II. I know we had to have points to get out, and each month everybody was sort of counting up how many points they got for that month, and you know, you knew what the number was that you had to reach. I knew I wasn't anywhere close to it, so it didn't really worry me too much, but it caused people to get transferred off the ship every month, and then we had to figure out, well, can we do without that person, or we have to have a person to replace them? Quite often we had to do without, because they just kept trying to reduce the number of people on active duty. But I don't remember the exact specifics of it, but I know we got a list every month and we knew where we stood. And I've forgotten really how many points you had to have, but it was several hundred. As I said earlier, I felt like once I got on that ship I was fortunate, because I just felt like I was at home, and I felt like we were doing a real good job and a needed job. And I was also pleased that this ship, and I didn't mention, it had a chaplain. So we had church every Sunday, which most ships didn't have. The bulk of the ships don't have a chaplain available. Since it was a hospital type, we did have a chaplain. And he and I are still close friends. He's in New York State, and he goes to Florida for the spring 3 months. And he'll be coming through here in March, and he stops by and visits me on the way down. But he's a retired minister now. But I've always enjoyed him very much. But I just felt like I was fortunate in the type duty I had.